Mr. President, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, I have the great honor to introduce the pre-recorded message of His Holiness Pope Francis.
Señor Presidente.
President, peace be with you all. I would like warmly to greet you, President, and all delegations taking part in this significant 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. In particular, I would like to greet the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and heads of state and government participating, and all of those following this general debate. The 75th anniversary of the United Nations represents an opportunity to reiterate the Holy See's desire for this organization to be a genuine sign and instrument of unity between states and at the service of the entire human family. Our world is currently affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. This has led to the loss of many lives. This crisis is changing our way of life, calling into question our economic, health, and social systems, and exposing our fragility as creatures. The pandemic indeed calls upon us to take this testing time as a time for choosing, the time to choose between what really counts, what really matters, and what doesn't matter so much, to separate what is necessary from what is unnecessary. It may represent a genuine opportunity for transformation, for us to rethink our lifestyles and our economic and social systems, which are only widening the gap between the rich and the poor, as a result of an unjust distribution of resources. But it can also be a possibility for withdrawal, which would be characterized by individualistic characteristics. We are therefore facing the choice between two different paths. One leads to enhancing multilateralism, the expression of renewed global shared responsibility and solidarity based on justice and achieving peace and unity for the human family, which is God's project for the world. The other option gives priority to self-sufficiency, to nationalism, protectionism, individualism, and isolation. This option excludes the poorest, the most vulnerable, those living on the periphery. And this would certainly be harmful for the entire community. It would harm us all. This, therefore, must not prevail. The pandemic has shone a crude light on the urgent need to promote public health and to realize everyone's right to basic health care. I therefore renew my appeal to political stakeholders and to the private sector for them to take the necessary measures to guarantee access to vaccines against COVID-19 and access to essential technologies which are needed to care for the sick. If anyone is to be given priority, let it be the poorest, the most vulnerable, those who so often are discriminated against because they do not have any power or economic resources. The current crisis has also shown us that solidarity cannot be an empty promise. It also shows us the importance of avoiding the temptation to exceed our natural limits. Human freedom is able to direct its methods towards a healthier kind of progress, which would be more social and more comprehensive. We must also bear all of these aspects in mind in our discussions on the complex issue of artificial intelligence. Bearing this in mind, I'm also reflecting on the effects on work, the labour market that has been destabilized by increasing uncertainty and increasing levels of automation. We must find new ways of work that are really able to satisfy the human potential, and that also at the same time reaffirm our dignity. To guarantee dignified work, the dominant economic paradigm needs to be changed, as this only aims to boost company profits. Providing more people with work should be one of the main overarching goals of all entrepreneurs. It should be one of the success criteria of productive activity. Technological progress is useful and necessary, provided that it make people's work more dignified, safer, and less tiring and burdensome. All of this requires a change of direction, but we already have the resources for this. We already have the technical and cultural means at our disposal, and we have the necessary social awareness. However, this change requires a stronger ethical framework so that we can get beyond the so widespread notion of the culture of waste. Behind this culture of waste, there is a lack of respect for human dignity, an ideological promotion with a reductionist vision of the person, a denial of universality of fundamental rights, and a desire of power and absolute control which dominate today's society. Let us be crystal clear. This is also an attack on humanity. Indeed, it is painful to see how many fundamental rights continue to be violated with impunity. There's a very long list of such violations. This brings up the terrible image of humanity that has been wounded and deprived of dignity and freedom and the possibility of development. In this image, religious believers also continue to suffer from all kinds of persecution, including even genocide as a result of their beliefs. Among religious believers, Christians also suffer. Many suffer around the world. Often they have to flee their ancestral lands. They are isolated from their rich history and culture. We should also admit that humanitarian crises have become the status quo, where the rights to life, freedom, and personal security are not guaranteed. Indeed, conflicts around the world show that the use of explosive weapons, in particular in populated areas, have a tragic long-term humanitarian impact. Conventional weapons, indeed, are becoming increasingly less conventional and increasingly more akin to weapons of mass destruction, ruining cities, schools, hospitals, religious sites, and critical infrastructure for the provision of basic services. Furthermore, many are obliged to flee their homes. Frequently, refugees, migrants, internally displaced persons in countries of origin, transit, and destination suffer alone, without any prospects of improving their lot in life or that of their family. And even worse, thousands are intercepted at sea and sent back forcefully to detention camps where they may suffer torture and abuse. Many are victims of trafficking, sexual slavery, or forced labor. They are exploited in degrading work and are not paid a fair wage. This is intolerable. However, it is a reality today, and a reality that many turn a blind eye to. The many significant international efforts that have been made to respond to this crisis begin with a great promise, and this includes the two major global compacts on refugees and for migration. However, many lack the necessary political support to be successful. Others fail because individual states shirk their responsibilities and fail to fulfill their commitments. However, the current crisis represents an opportunity. It represents an opportunity for the United Nations, an opportunity to bring about a more fraternal and compassionate society. This includes reviewing the role of economic and financial institutions, such as the Bretton Woods institutions, which must respond to the rapid increase in inequality between the super-rich and the permanently poor. An economic model that promotes subsidiarity, that supports economic development at the grassroots level, and that invests in education and infrastructure to the benefit of local communities. This kind of model will lay the foundations for economic success, and at the same time for a renewal of the community and the nation at large. At this point, I reiterate my appeal that, in the light of the circumstances, that all countries grapple with the great needs of the moment by reducing or even writing off the debt that weighs so heavy on the budgets of the poorest. The international community must strive to put an end to economic injustices. When multilateral lending institutions advise different nations, it is crucial that they bear in mind the lofty concepts of fiscal justice and responsible public budgeting, and, above all, the effective promotion of the poorest in the social fabric. We have the responsibility to provide assistance for development to impoverished nations and to provide debt relief for the most heavily indebted nations. A new ethics entails being mindful of the need for all to commit to work together to close tax havens, to avoid tax evasion and money laundering that deprive society, and also to highlight the importance of upholding justice and the common good over the interests of companies and the most powerful multinationals. This is the appropriate time to renew the international financial architecture. President, I remember when I was able to address the General Assembly 5 years ago at its 70th anniversary. My visit took place at a time when multilateralism was really dynamic. It was a promising time, full of hope. This was immediately prior to the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. Some months after that, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change was also adopted. However, we must be honest and admit that while some progress has been achieved, the international community has not truly been able to fulfill most of its promises from 5 years ago. And this leads me to reiterate that we must avoid every temptation to fall into a declarationist nominalism, which would only assuage our consciences. We must ensure that our institutions are genuinely effective when it comes to combating all of these scourges. I'm also thinking about the dangerous situation in the Amazon and the indigenous peoples who live there. This reminds us that the environmental crisis is intimately linked to a social crisis, and that caring for the environment requires a comprehensive approach to deal with poverty and to combat exclusion. It is certainly a positive step that there is a heightened sense of awareness and desire for action. We must not burden future generations with the problems of previous generations. We must seriously ask ourselves if we have the necessary political will to mitigate the negative effects of climate change. And we must also ask ourselves whether we have the desire to help the poorest and most vulnerable as they bear the brunt of this phenomenon. The Holy See will continue to play its role. As a concrete sign of caring for our common home, I recently ratified the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. President, we must also note the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 crisis on children, including migrants and unaccompanied refugees. The violence against children, including the terrible scourge of child abuse and child pornography, have also dramatically increased. In addition, thousands of children are not able to go back to school. In many parts of the world, this situation threatens to lead to an increase in child labor, as well as exploitation, mistreatment, and malnutrition. Unfortunately, international institutions and nations are also promoting abortion as one of the so-called essential services in the humanitarian response. It is sad to see how convenient it has become for some to deny the existence of life as a solution to problems that can and must be solved both for the mother and for the unborn child. I therefore call on authorities to care particularly for children, for those who are denied their rights and fundamental dignity, in particular their right to life and education. I must also remind you of the appeal of brave Malala Yousafzai, who spoke to the General Assembly 5 years ago and reminded us that a child, a teacher, a book, and a pen can change the world. The first teachers of any child are its mother and father. The family, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is the natural and fundamental element of society. All too frequently, families are victims of ideological colonialisms, which make the family vulnerable and very often ends up harming those most defenseless and leads to a feeling of rootlessness and orphanhood. The disintegration of the family is then echoed in social fragmentation, which prevents compromise to grapple with common enemies. It is time that we reevaluate and commit once again to attain our goals. And one of these goals is the promotion of women. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference on Women. At all levels of society, women are playing a significant role with their unique contribution, acting with great bravery to the service of the common good. However, many women are excluded or are victims of slavery, trafficking, violence and exploitation, and degrading treatment. To all of those who are living apart from their families, I would like to express my proximity to them, and I also would like to reiterate that there should be greater commitment to combat these perverse practices that denigrate not just women, but also all of humanity. In this regard, inaction and silence are complicity. President, we must wonder whether the main threats to peace and security, such as poverty, epidemics, terrorism, and so on and so forth, can be addressed effectively when the arms race, including the race for nuclear weapons, continues to waste precious resources that would be better allocated for the benefit of the comprehensive development of people and to protect the natural environment. We need to break the climate of mistrust that exists. We are seeing an erosion of multilateralism. This is even more serious in the light of the development of new forms of military technology, such as, for instance, lethal autonomous weapons systems, which are irreversibly changing the nature of war, separating it even further from human action. The perverse logic that links the possession of weapons to human and personal security must be dismantled. This logic only serves to increase the profits of the industry of war. It fosters a climate of mistrust and fear between peoples. In particular, nuclear deterrence fosters a spirit of fear based on the threat of mutual destruction. It ends up poisoning relations between peoples and obstructing dialogue. That is why it is so important that we support the main international legal instruments for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation and prohibition. The Holy See hopes that the forthcoming review conference for the NPT Treaty will lead to concrete measures being taken in line with our common intention to see the end of the arms race, the nuclear arms race, as soon as possible. We do hope that effective measures will be taken towards achieving nuclear disarmament. In addition, our world, riven by conflict, needs the United Nations to become a more effective workshop for peace. This requires members of the Security Council, in particular the P5, to act with greater unity and determination. In this regard, the recent adoption of the global ceasefire during this crisis is a very noble endeavour. It requires the good faith of all if it is to be continually implemented. I also reiterate the importance of reducing international sanctions, as they make it harder for states to provide appropriate support to their peoples. President, A crisis changes us all, either for the better or for the worse. That is why, at this critical juncture, our duty is to rethink the future of our common home and our common project. This is a complex task that requires honesty and consistency in dialogue, so that we enhance multilateralism and cooperation between states. This crisis underscores even further the limits of our self-sufficiency and it underscores our common fragility. It means that we must be clear on how we wish to be changed. Will it change us for the better or for the worse? Because as I say, a crisis changes us all, either for the better or for the worse. The pandemic has shown us that we cannot live without others, or even worse, against others. The United Nations was established to bring countries together as a bridge between people. Let us use the UN to transform our current challenge into an opportunity, so that together, once and for all, we can build the future we want. God bless us all. Thank you very much, President.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Holiness Pope Francis of the Holy See for the statement just made. I now give the floor to the distinguished observer of the Observer State of Palestine to introduce an address by the Head of State.